before passing the torch over to our last speaker, our keynote speaker, our second keynote speaker of the day, and to finish off our fourth annual in-house education retreat, I'd like to introduce Dr. Janet Abbate, who is a professor of science, technology, and society at Virginia Tech, and also serves as a co-director of the graduate program of the Department of Science, Technology, and Society in Northern Virginia. She has published a number of different well-renowned and well-received books, including Inventing the Internet and Recoding Gender, Women's Changing Participation in Computing. And both of these are part of a long history of her interest in the policy issues of internet and computing as they relate to culture and gender. And she was trained in her bachelor degree at Harvard University, then received her master's at the University of Pennsylvania, as well as her PhD in the University of Pennsylvania. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Abbate and say thank you so much again for agreeing to be one of our keynote speakers. We are incredibly appreciative, and we are looking forward to your talk. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a really thought-provoking panel. So let me just share my screen here. Okay, can you see the slides now?
Yep, everything looks and sounds good.
Great. So I am not a scientist. My research expertise is in the history of computing. And as Connor said, my first book was a history of the internet. And as I was researching that, I kept wondering, where are all the women in this story? Because I myself had worked as a computer programmer in the 1980s, and there had been plenty of women then. So I really thought I would find them in this history. And I decided that my next project would be about women in the history of computing, which became this book, Recoding Gender. As part of that project, I interviewed 52 women in the United States and the United Kingdom who had started their computing careers in either computer science or software from the 1940s to the early 1980s. So I'll be sharing some of their comments today in the course of my talk. History can inform our understanding of current conditions in a number of ways. It reminds us that women have been in STEM forever. We don't need to prove we can do STEM because we have been doing STEM for centuries, just not always getting credit. History also shows us how gender is embedded in the practice of STEM careers. And sometimes the more obvious and blatant examples from the past can help us recognize more subtle forms of bias and structural inequality in the present. Women's stories can also give us ideas and models and inspiration for how things can be done differently. I'm going to start with a look at the current status of women in computer science. And we can see the numbers are kind of low. They hover around 20 to 25%, depending on what metric you're looking at. So the number of women getting bachelor's degrees in computer science has been fairly flat. That's that orange line at the bottom. The top line is total, and then men are the blue line in the middle. So even as the number of men has been rising, the number of women has been kind of stagnating at the same level. For doctoral degrees, women again, kind of flat. Men have also gone down somewhat recently, but are definitely about 4 times as many men as women at the doctoral level. Looking at faculty, again, it's about 4 to 1 at the assistant professor level, and then it just gets worse as you go up in seniority. If you look at computer occupations overall, the picture is quite varied. It averages about 26% for all computer occupations. The bar that I've done in red is computer and information research scientists. So these are people who might have PhDs. That's around 32% women. Finally, looking at salaries, there's obviously a gender gap. The first line is all science and engineering occupations, and you have computer and information science. And then it's broken out by age. It's kind of interesting at the lower age, at the younger ages, the disparity is much less, and age 29 or under, women are actually earning slightly more median salary than men. which is quite interesting. So I don't know if that's because wage disparities increase with seniority, or if there's been a generational shift toward greater equality. That would certainly be good to know. So far, the story of computer science is similar to the story of STEM in general, similar trends. But there is something different about computer science. If you look at the slide from 1970 to 2019, the percentage of women employed in every area of STEM has gone up since 1970, except for computing, which has actually gone down. It peaked in 1990, and it's actually gone down ever since. To quote the Census Bureau report that this came from, women did not make big gains in computer and engineering occupations, which make up the largest portion, 80% of the STEM workforce. Women represented only about a quarter of computer workers. If you look at computer science bachelor degrees, this is percentage women rather than the absolute numbers that I showed before. The percentage of women, the pink line is all science and engineering bachelor degrees, and the darker line underneath is computer science. So again, it peaked around 1983 and has gone down since then. This slide ends in 2006, but the past 10 years, it's still hovering around 20%. There's no radical improvement since this time. So really, in contrast to other STEM areas, there's something going on with computer science where not only is it low, but it's actually been going down. And there are a lot of theories as to why this is the case. Spoiler alert, I don't have the answer, but there's a lot of people, a lot of bright minds thinking about this and trying to work on it. One theory is that computer science is becoming more like engineering. And so those bottom two lines of computer science and engineering are just converging because they're becoming similar. One theory is that computer science is strongly gendered masculine in the popular imagination, that there's a popular image of what kind of person does this. And this is a masculine image that discourages girls and young women. Another possibility is that people aren't aware of computer science as a research field, as a science. Unlike most of the other sciences, chemistry, biology, physics that are taught in schools, in grade schools universally, computer science is not taught in all schools. So young people may not realize you can do more with a computer science degree than just get a coding job, that you could actually do research. Another possibility is that selective computer science programs use criteria that disproportionately exclude women, so that it's not that women don't want to do it, but that they're not getting in. And finally, some people hypothesize that there's something about the way computer science is taught that deters women. Several years ago, the National Science Foundation revamped the AP computer science curriculum, for example, to try to make it more broadly appealing, so that it wasn't, the first version of APCS was more just heavy duty coding, and the next one is more, it's got more of the theory in it and is kind of broader. And so that was one attempt to see if more women would be interested in it. So there's a lot of possibilities, and there's a lot of people, actual computer scientists on the front lines, who are working on all of these issues, and probably more, to try to address this concerning downward trend. There are also people who argue that it's not really a problem, that since there's no formal barriers to women and girls taking these courses or applying for these jobs, that maybe women are either inherently less talented in STEM fields, or they're just not interested in computers. So the problem is women, the problem is not computing. But in my opinion, blaming women for their own exclusion does not really square with the evidence of all the women who have loved computer science and excelled at computer science, despite all the obstacles and discouragement that have been thrown in their way. I think women are extremely motivated and have displayed talent in this, and it's amazing as many of them have persisted when you look at some of the obstacles there. So it's still a bit of a mystery. I wish I had the answer to this. But the piece I want to focus on, that I do think is a contributor, is how gender is implicated in shaping women's opportunities in STEM, specifically in computer science. Gender impacts the practice of science and engineering in a number of structural and cultural ways, as we've seen today. It shapes career paths. It permeates the culture of the classroom, lab, and workplace. Gender stereotypes color how we think about and evaluate skill. And gendered expectations are embedded in the organization of work. Banu gave us a wonderful overview this morning of gendered cultures in science, where there are different rules for women and men. I'm going to give some historical examples of these types of issues and ask whether and how they're still present and potentially contributing to the trends that we see in these graphs. Skill, talent, expertise is one important area where gender has shaped our perceptions. Traditionally, technical skills have been seen as masculine, while activities seen as feminine have traditionally been devalued and seen as non-technical. But the line between technical and non-technical activities is an artificial and highly gender biased one. So example, an activity like woodworking might seem like a technical skill, but sewing might seem like a non-technical skill, when actually, if you think about what's involved, it's really not categorically that different other than the material being worked with. Interestingly, at the dawn of digital computing in the late 1940s, when virtually no one had training or experience in the field, employers often drew on activities associated with both genders as indicators of potential skill with computers. For example, when Betty Campbell was working as a mathematician at MIT in the mid-1940s, her talent for knitting was seen as an indication that she might do well as a programmer, and they recruited her to do that. Computer pioneer Grace Murray Hopper used to tell women that if they had the organizational skills to plan an elaborate dinner, then they had what it took to program a computer. And this is Grace Hopper, probably the most famous woman in computing, who was an early software pioneer. She invented the compiler, and here she is heading software development at an early computer corporation. So the point is not that these interests alone are going to get you a job, cooking or knitting, but framing ability in this way, saying, well, if you're good at these traditional female things, you might actually be good at programming. This invited women to see themselves as a good fit for a STEM job and then have the confidence to apply. A similar strategy might work today. Rather than assuming that girls with no STEM background are completely devoid of relevant skills, we could ask if their other pursuits demonstrate or have developed skills that are valuable in STEM. There are plenty of other types of courses or hobbies popular with girls that cultivate skills such as logical problem solving, organizing complex tasks, or displaying proficiency with rule-based systems. Taking girls' activities seriously would send the message that who they already are and what they're already enjoying could make them a good fit for a STEM career. They don't need to change their personality or interests. Another issue is that social skills, which have been stereotypically gendered feminine, are valued less than technical skills. But being a computer scientist or being in charge of a software project is not just sitting alone in a room with a whiteboard. You also need to communicate with your students, your colleagues, your teammates. You need to coordinate different pieces of a project. And these people skills are often undervalued and unrewarded, even though they may be essential to the success of a program or a project. A 2020 report by Elsevier on gender in scientific research confirms that collaboration is essential for research and innovation, and that collaboration suffers in a male-dominated environment. One of the things they noted is that research is increasingly collaborative, and studies have demonstrated that the proportion of women in a group is one of 3 key factors that correlate with the collective intelligence of that group. But social skills are not even seen as skills at all, typically. They're seen as something women just naturally possess, so they don't really get credit for having acquired a skill. Whereas there is a gender-biased assumption that the technical skills traditionally identified with masculinity are much harder to learn. But is this really true? Is there any evidence that it's easier for scientists and engineers to pick up social skills than for socially adept people to learn science and engineering? I'm not aware of any studies on this, but the record of software engineering failures suggests otherwise. There have been a number of spectacular failures where custom software systems costing millions of dollars were scrapped without ever being used. And one of the main reasons, according to experts, is a failure to get an accurate understanding of the requirements from the customer. This is a communication problem, and it's a problem that software engineers themselves has identified as hugely important. And yet we don't see software engineering curricula being revamped to recognize and teach these social and communication skills. And this, I argue, is because gender bias makes it hard, again, to see that social skills are technical skills. A technical project will not succeed with just technical skills. The imbalance in the way we value different types of skill is bad for STEM, and it shortchanges women and men who've taken the trouble to cultivate interpersonal skills. If instead we celebrated these skills as one of the factors that help you succeed in science, this could help more women see STEM careers as a good fit for their talents. Gender also shapes career paths and timing. In the past, gender bias shaped women's career opportunities in overt and categorical ways. Job listings were segregated by sex. Computer jobs were listed under help wanted male in the newspaper. And there was open and legal discrimination in hiring and pay. There were paternalist labor policies that prohibited women from working at night or when pregnant. In academia, women were often denied access to education in science or engineering. One example is Anne Hardy, who went to college in 1951, hoping to major in chemistry. But the chair of the chemistry department at her college didn't want, quote, girls in his labs and wouldn't let her be a chem major. Hardy recalled, I had to find a way around having a male for an advisor, so I majored in phys ed, so I could have a woman for my advisor who would let me take math and science. In other words, because men were the gatekeepers for science, the only way she could take science courses was to major in something else. After graduating, she took the advice of a male friend of hers who was an engineer at IBM and applied for a job there. She said she was making a great impression on the women in personnel until she asked Hardy what her college major was. So imagine trying to interview for a computer job and explaining your phys ed degree. Fortunately, Hardy was able to take a programmer aptitude test, which was a standard math and logic test that they used to use. And she aced that and started on a successful career, eventually founding 2 software companies. But this is an example of kind of cumulative disadvantage from being barred from majoring in science could have kept her from opportunities down the road. Now, obviously, most of these overt types of barriers have been removed by changes in law and culture. But many years of sex segregation have created a kind of inertia. So women can major in STEM now, but they still might not have a lot of female professors or role models further up the pipeline. Anne Hardy's transition from phys ed to computing is just one example of an unexpected academic path. One thing I noticed from interviewing these early generations of STEM women is that women's career paths were often accidental and circuitous. While most men entered computer careers straight from a math or engineering background, women often majored in unrelated fields or worked in unrelated areas before something clicked that encouraged them to transition to computer science. For example, Hilary Kahn earned a degree in Latin and Greek in the mid-1960s and initially aspired to be an archaeologist. When she was unable to get a job in that field due to sexism, she became interested in computers, earned a graduate degree, and eventually became the chair of the computer science department at Manchester University. Fran Allen, who excelled as a researcher at IBM and became the first woman to win the prestigious Turing Award, started her working life as a high school math teacher. And often women with math degrees were typically channeled into teaching high school math. That was probably the single largest career for them back in the 60s. Laurie Keller was an English major whose fascination with languages led her to take a Fortran class in college. After a series of programming jobs, she got a graduate degree in computer science and became the first female lecturer in computing at the UK Open University. This difference in the shape of career paths, where people really take an odd turn to get into computer science, is one way that opportunity is gendered. People who are concerned about gender balance in computer science often talk about the so-called pipeline that we've heard a lot about today, where you take computer science classes in high school and then you major in it in college and then you go on to grad school. But this linear pipeline model really reflects what has historically been a masculine experience. Even though the legal barriers to women are now gone, it is still the case that many women who could potentially thrive in computer science are not going directly into the field. So I think we should take a cue from history and think about how to recruit women who've started down other paths. How can we train people later in life, and how can we value and draw on the skills they have acquired in these other areas? For example, several of the women I interviewed arranged to earn their computer science degrees in parallel with academic employment rather than having to do it beforehand. So that gave them a kind of flexibility to make this mid-career change. Another gendered aspect of career paths has to do with timing. Assumptions about the optimal timing of career milestones, which are based again on masculine patterns, can turn into constraints for women. There is a pervasive belief that STEM careers must start young. Margaret Murray wrote a book about the career paths of women who earned a PhD in mathematics in the United States. And she talks about what she calls the myth of the mathematical life course. In this myth, you have to show that you're a genius at a young age, and then you're washed up by the time you're 30. But this reflects the masculine experience. Murray found that women tended to have their greatest achievements at a later age than men. So the myth hurts women because they don't match this pattern of what talent is supposed to look like. We see some of this in computer science as well. For example, the ACM has an award named after computer pioneer Grace Murray Hopper. The award is for an outstanding young computer professional under the age of 35. The irony here is that Grace Hopper herself didn't start her computing career until she was 37. So late bloomers can still be leaders, but only if we rethink this assumption that if you're going to amount to something, you'll demonstrate this at an early age. One of the interventions people have made to channel more women into computer science is to start coding camps and clubs for teenage girls, things such as Girls Who Code or Black Girls Code. And I think this is a great idea to create fun and supportive spaces for girls to explore and hone their skills at programming. But I think there's also a risk of reinforcing this narrative that you have to start young. If we want more women in computer science, we shouldn't send the message to teenage girls that if they're not interested in coding right now, they might as well forget ever having a computer career. We need to have role models for people who enter later on. Maybe we need women who code. A cautionary example of this comes from a study that Carnegie Mellon did in the early 2000s as part of their effort to increase the number of women admitted to their computer science major. One of the things they looked at was the preference they had been giving to applicants who had done programming activities prior to college. So again, computer camps, coding clubs. They just assumed that these applicants, who were mainly boys, would be better qualified. But when they actually looked at the data, they found that pre-college computer experience made no difference to success in the computer science major. So once again, gendered assumptions about timing worked against women. When Carnegie Mellon abandoned this admission preference, they were able to admit many more women who did just as well as the people who had done these teenage activities. So one thing we can learn from history is that women have been able to create successful academic careers starting later in life from diverse and unconventional backgrounds. Women's past successes in forging alternative career trajectories can help us think outside the pipeline. For example, in the UK, they have what they call conversion courses for people who got their bachelor's degree in one area, but now they want to move into another area. You take a certain number of classes in the target area in order to convert your degree to that area. So conversion courses allowed some women are interviewed to turn their non-technical degree, so psychology or history or whatever it was, into a technical degree so that they could then go on to graduate work. So it's a kind of a do-over of your undergraduate degree. So instead of having a pipeline that you have to enter as a teenager and then it's the only path, the STEM career path could be more like a river where there's different streams feeding into it along the way, and you've got more chances to get in there. Gender has been used as an organizing principle for the division of labor for all of recorded human history. In modern industrialized countries, this historically meant, first of all, that people were expected to form heterosexual marriages, and second, that within the marriage, the man would work full-time for pay and the woman would work unpaid in the home. So the economic unit in this gendered labor system is not the individual, but the married couple. Thus, one justification for paying men more for the same job was that they needed to earn a quote unquote family wage. Women were not expected to be supporting themselves except on a temporary basis until they found a husband, which was the rationale for paying them less for the same work. Women who had to support themselves, or women in same-sex couples, did not fit into the normative gender system and therefore were not accommodated into the labor system either. Obviously, much has changed in the past century. The majority of women now work outside the home. Female-headed households are common, and civil rights legislation in the 1970s outlawed explicit hiring and pay discrimination. But the gendered assumptions built into the organization of work linger on. The paradigmatic worker, whether in a lab or an office, is someone who can devote all their waking hours to work because someone else is taking care of any family obligations. Some of the systemic aspects of gendered work organization include physical spaces, work hours, and the accommodation, or more likely lack of accommodation, for family responsibilities. All of these affected women in computer science in the past, and some are still issues today. I'll start with physical spaces. Early computer workplaces were designed for people with male bodies. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the lack of women's bathrooms. It seems that every woman I interviewed had some kind of anecdote regarding bathrooms. Thelma Estrin, who started a brain research laboratory as a professor at UCLA, or a brain research data science laboratory, recalled that when she was starting out in 1951, she applied for her first job at the RCA laboratories in Princeton, but she was rejected because the building didn't have a ladies' room. Lucy Slater did pioneering research in math and computing at Cambridge University in 1951, where she discovered that the computer lab only had a men's toilet. The men didn't want to share, but she refused to walk over to another building just to use the restroom. So Slater eventually persuaded them to institute a system where everyone would whistle or sing while they were in the restroom so that there would be no unexpected encounters. The most famous bathroom story comes from Anita Borg. Borg was at a computer science conference in 1987 when she ran into another female attendee in the women's bathroom, and they began to talk about why there were so few women in computer science. Every woman who came in joined the conversation until finally Borg said, "We need somewhere else to talk. We need a space where women can talk to each other that's not just the bathroom." They got all the women at the conference to meet up for dinner that night, and Borg collected everyone's email address and set up a mailing list called Sisters so that these women could keep their conversations going after the conference was over. So let's pause to remember that this was 1987. This was before social media, before the web, even listservs had only just been invented. So this was a pretty novel idea, and it had a powerful impact because most women were the only woman in their computer science department, sometimes the only woman in an entire engineering school. So they were very isolated. As Borg described it, before Sisters existed, there was no community of women in computing. We all existed as individuals. We had maybe a few women that we knew, but there was no notion of how many women were out there doing what. The community that Borg built using Sisters also helped her organize the first Grace Hopper celebration of women in computing in 1994, which is now an annual computer science conference. The Grace Hopper Conference does not exclude men, but it is aimed at women, and they make up most of the attendees. This creates a unique space, a unique physical space, where women can experience being in the majority at a STEM event and see what it feels like for them to be the norm and for their ways of interacting to set the tone for the event. Women who went to the first Grace Hopper conference described being astonished at the difference in tone. They said it was less macho, less competitive, less egotistical than the male-dominated conferences they usually went to. And that way, it provides a kind of experimental control where we can see that the ordinary computer science conferences are not gender neutral, but actually gendered masculine. Women described having to put on psychological armor to attend those, and what a relief it was to be able to drop that and just be themselves at the Hopper conference and still be taken seriously as scientists. The point here is not to say, let's have separate women's conferences for all the STEM areas, but to use insights from this experiment to ask whether the mainstream conferences are perpetuating a masculine environment and how they could be made more welcoming to a diversity of participants. Another way that some bodies are privileged over others in the workplace is through gender binaries. Gender is a binary system, has been ingrained in Western culture and also in computing, whether it's databases that only have 2 categories for gender, as Kat mentioned earlier, or employers who fire workers for transitioning. Probably the best known transgender person in computing history is Lynn Conway, an emerita computer science professor at the University of Michigan. Conway joined IBM in 1964 and helped build a supercomputer called the Advanced Computing System. But when she transitioned from male to female in 1968, she was fired by IBM's upper management. She restarted her career under a new name, joined Xerox PARC in 1973, and became a superstar of VLSI chip design before going on to an academic career. While Conway was extremely successful as a woman in computing, it was not until 1999 that she came out as transgender to her colleagues. And only then, because her early work at IBM was receiving new attention from historians. She has since become a transgender icon and activist. IBM formally apologized to Conway in 2020, and more importantly, in the past 20 years, IBM has put in place a number of protections and services for transgender employees. On the industry side of computing, I discovered an organization called TransTech Social Enterprises that was founded in 2014 to provide online training and employment for transgender programmers. And the idea here is that, again, the physical space of the workplace is not always welcoming. And people who are in the process of transitioning can feel very out of place in the physical workplace. So they set up this virtual workplace so that they could earn a living without having to physically be in an office while they were transitioning. I don't know whether computer science is any better or worse than any other area of STEM for transgender or gender fluid people, but this is definitely another area where we need to be aware of which types of bodies are accommodated or not in STEM spaces. Computing spaces have been gendered in other ways. In the past, it was not unusual for men to hang pinups of naked women on the walls, as Laurie Keller encountered when she worked for Philips Electronics in 1974. The men were putting up girly nude photos on the walls. When the female programmers complained, they were ignored. So they fought back by hanging a Playgirl centerfold of a nude man on the wall. The men were horrified at seeing a man be sexually objectified, and this led to a truce where all nude pictures were banned from the office. And I remember, even in the 1980s, line printer pictures of nude women were not uncommon to see in a printer room. Well, this type of blatant sexual harassment is fortunately not so common anymore. There are more subtle ways that a space can be marked as masculine. A 2009 study found that changing the decor in a computer science classroom from objects that evoked a male nerd stereotype, such as a Star Trek poster, video game boxes, and junk food containers, to more gender-neutral objects significantly increased female students' expressed interest in majoring in computer science. In other words, changing nothing more than the decor in the room made undergraduate women more comfortable considering computer science as a major. These are simple things that, once you're aware of their impact, could be easily changed. Another gendered aspect of STEM work is time, in particular, the long work hours. Many women, and perhaps many men, in the computer field have wished for the option to work part-time so that they can maintain their technical skills while making time for their families. But part-time work has been persistently stigmatized as a sign that employees are not really committed to their jobs or as a dead-end mommy track. The association of full-time work with professionalism is a legacy of the gendered workplace that has been very difficult to dislodge. And in my book, I talk about in the programming field how some female entrepreneurs started companies that were specifically, the specific goal was to hire part-time mothers who wanted to program part-time while raising their children. And they successfully created these software companies that lasted for 50 years or so. Obviously, it's a little harder to do that, set up your own academic department. But the issue of hours and making the number of hours compatible with family is certainly ongoing. It also matters when those hours are. Working at night has been associated with masculinity. Women were not supposed to be on the streets at night for their own safety, and women were not supposed to work with men at night for fear of sexual impropriety. Instead of making those nighttime spaces safe for women, the response was to simply ban women from these spaces. But computer work often involved late nights, especially in the early years when people had to share a single mainframe computer instead of having their own. Women often had to fight to be allowed to work at night. One example is Mary Lee Berners-Lee, who is the mother of World Wide Web creator Tim Berners-Lee. She worked at the Ferranti computer firm in Manchester, England in the 1950s. Ferranti had built a computer for the university and had the use of it during the off hours, which meant between midnight and 8 a.m. The Ferranti personnel department at first did not allow the female programmers to work those hours because they would be there at night with the male maintenance engineers and who knows what might happen. So Mary Lee Berners-Lee and her female colleagues protested this, and they got this ban overturned so that they could actually do their work. Then the personnel department wanted them to have a chaperone watching over them at night, which the women managed to veto as well. Of course, nobody suggested that the men should be restricted or watched over. Paula Hawthorne faced the problem of night work when she started graduate school in computer science at Berkeley in 1974. Hawthorne was a single parent, and on her first day in the program, her assigned advisor told her that she should drop out because, quote, "You cannot be a serious student if you have children." She ignored that, but when she tried to schedule computer time to do her research, she was told the only time available was from midnight to 3 a.m. Since she couldn't leave her kids alone in the middle of the night or afford an overnight babysitter, she thought she might have to drop out after all. Fortunately, she was able to switch to another research specialty where the professor had his own computers and she could work during the day. These stories illustrate how work hours that were unproblematic for men could be a huge obstacle to women due to stereotypes about sexuality and unequal burdens of childcare. This leads to one more structural issue, which is how the organization of work is not designed to accommodate people with family obligations. At first, the barriers against mothers were extreme. Until the Pregnancy Discrimination Act was passed in 1978, women in the US could legally be fired when they became pregnant, and they routinely were. But even after the law was changed, workplaces in general were not family friendly. Academic work could have special challenges for women with children. I interviewed a woman named Chris Warner, who got a job teaching computer science in 1975 and planned to get a PhD in the field, until a senior male colleague pulled her aside and warned her that it was not worthwhile to try to establish an academic career unless she could travel extensively to conferences. He pointedly asked her if she wanted to leave her family behind to do so. She ended up dropping the PhD and going into computer administration instead. Today, some STEM conferences have childcare on site, which is certainly an important step forward. One program that has helped change conditions for women in academia is the National Science Foundation's Advance program, which was started in 2001 to advance the representation and advancement of women in academic science and engineering careers. I imagine Some of you are probably familiar with this. I served on the advanced committee at my own institution, Virginia Tech, and a number of specific changes were made to improve work-life balance for women faculty. These include an automatic extension of the tenure clock when you have or adopt a child, the ability to request part-time employment for a period of time to accommodate caring for children or ill family members, private lactation rooms, and subsidized daycare. These changes directly address structural issues of time and space like the ones I've described. These services have been widely used by both women and men, and have helped STEM faculty move through the tenure and promotion ranks more easily, which leads to the question, why did we wait so long to provide them? Our recent experience in the COVID pandemic has shown that these systemic problems are far from being solved. Women have dropped out of the labor force at disproportionate rates as their ability to work and care for their families abruptly shifted from a difficult balancing act to a complete impossibility. At the same time, though, the pressure of the pandemic has forced many employers to accommodate workers' desires to work from home, which has finally brought about some of the flexibility that women have been asking for. Moving forward, we should think about what ways of organizing time and space are really necessary and are conducive to equal participation in STEM careers, rather than falling back on old ways that have had hidden costs for women. In conclusion, I've tried to show some of the structural and cultural ways that gender has been embedded in STEM professions in ways that we might not even realize. Historical examples remind us just how real these barriers have been, but they also show us the courage, ingenuity, and even humor that women have mustered to overcome them. These women prevailed, and their work has changed the world. I hope that their example can give us insights on how to make science and engineering more welcoming for all genders. Thank you for listening. I'm going to put my sources up for a few seconds so you can grab them off the screen if you want. This is the source for the data charts, and these are sources from the other studies I talked about. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. I think we got clapping. Thank you so much, Dr. Abbate. Yeah, Kat from the audience has a question. Let me flip the video around for you.
Hi, great talk. I have a question regarding kind of the bias towards the masculine career path.
Mm-hmm.
So in my kind of subfield of neuroscience, which is neuroendocrinology, we have some young investigator and early career awards. Do you think that these young investigator or early career awards that have age or time since PhD requirements discriminate against women in STEM? And how do you suggest rewarding people early in their STEM career without biasing towards male typical career trajectory?
So I'm not necessarily against early career awards, but maybe we should have some late career awards, like for the person who published their first paper after age 30 or something, the best one or something, or just simply have other ways to encourage people. But it's more the kind of sense that, you know, if you haven't made a name for yourself by age 30, then you're completely washed up, you have no potential. Whereas historically, a lot of women did their best work in their 40s or 50s for whatever reason. Maybe they got a late start, or maybe, you know, maybe there's something else going on there. But just to the privileging of youth does seem to be biased toward the male path. So yeah, I wouldn't say let's ban early career awards.
Also, just anecdotally, I just got me thinking about this during your talk. My father, whose undergraduate degree was in computer science, actually became a math teacher for much of his 30s and 40s, and went back to get a PhD in his 50s. So he actually has kind of an atypical career path as well.
Right, and it's not even just women. There's a whole set of people who don't fit that narrow stereotype who could benefit. You know, and there's women who fit the stereotype. So it's not that like women can't be nerds, but it's more just broadening it so that all people can feel more welcome.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I loved your talk, and one of the things that I liked a lot about it, which I expected, knowing, of course, a bit about your work, is how a lot of the times in these retreats in our journal clubs, we kind of overemphasize, not overemphasize, but we emphasize like these large data sets. And I obviously, you showed some of that data at the very beginning, but also I think it's important to hear these anecdotal stories that are serve as like real prolific cases where a certain thing happened, and they, you know, they serve as great examples to keep in mind. So I actually really appreciate how many individual stories you provided. And to follow up on what Kat said, I also liked the kind of alternative view that you had, or not alternative, but kind of keeping it in our heads that, you know, we think about this leaky pipeline, but the pipeline is really only one avenue, whereas it's not the be all end all, and there's exits and entrances, if you will. And yeah, and the one question I had though is at the very beginning when you were talking about you know, the sort of the graph where the women in computer science was going up, and then it kind of went down, and all of the different reasons. Would you say amongst all of the reasons that you had said are hypotheses as to why, would you say that it's probably due to all of those different reasons, kind of like a communal effect of them, like you were talking about, or some of them were a little bit more, you know, superfluous, like it being more inherently masculine or something like that. So not those, but like all of the the reasonable hypotheses. Do you think it's kind of a combination of all those, or in your personal opinion, do you think like there's one outstanding thing that could really be changed? Yeah.
I think it's got to be multifactorial, because people have been working on this. People have been aware of this and trying to fix this for a long time. And I think if it had a simple answer, they would have found it by now. So I think it's definitely a combination of the image of the field, the working conditions. I'm guessing that those are the two, because I don't think it's that. I mean, at a younger age, girls are interested in this. They have fun with it. It's not any kind of inherent disinterest, and I think it develops later on. I mean, interestingly, a lot of the women I spoke to thought that computing was more female friendly in like the 1950s than in the 1980s, because in the 50s there wasn't really any stereotype, because it was so new. It was kind of too soon to really have a computing stereotype. Most people just knew nothing at all about computers, and so it seemed more gender neutral. And now it's got this, you know, pretty strong kind of geek stereotype where we think of like Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates or something. We don't really think of any women when we think of kind of popular figures in computing. So I think that is definitely more pervasive. One thing that happened in the 80s was that there was an explosion of interest in majoring in computer science. And so a lot of universities were more selective about who they would let major in computer science. And so again, women were squeezed out from some of these places because of the way they were selecting them. So I think there's kind of multiple things going on, which is what makes it hard to solve.
Yeah, and a follow-up question to something you said, and one of the most interesting parts about like the history of computing that I've learned from your talk is obviously this being less of a barrier to entry almost in the 50s versus a little later where it became maybe more popular and more profitable. Do you think that maybe just sort of the socioeconomic system of capitalism pushing like money and resources and like power into computing once it became clearly a profitable business had any effect? Like, do you think that that was a major factor in the fact that like maybe at first there wasn't a big spotlight on it, and then once there was, that's when men kind of stepped in and tried to dominate that field?
I mean, I think there was some aspect of that, because if you look at the graphs, it's not that the absolute number of women is going down. It's more like the number of men is going up, which is why the numbers keep getting worse. The number of women is kind of stagnant, and so their percentage keeps going down as more men come in. So I think there is this sense that men are being drawn in by certain things, and that women are not, or they're not being drawn in by those same things.
Yeah.
And certainly, if you look at the level of venture capital and things, I mean, the gender bias goes all the way up. And so, one reason we don't see more women CEOs of computer companies is because they're not getting the funding. They're not, they're not in that pipeline either. And it's this kind of self-fulfilling thing. And venture capitalists talk about what they call pattern matching, pattern recognition. We're like, well, I kind of just know what a good CEO looks like. And, looks like Mark Zuckerberg. It's like a white guy who went to Harvard in a hoodie, that's the guy we're going to fund. They have this kind of sense of what they think a successful person looks like. And it's not a woman, it's not a person of color, it's not an older person. So there's this kind of self-reinforcing, very narrow idea in the industry side, which, as you say, is part of what is driving this.
Yeah, that's kind of, I think, a much more eloquent and accurate way of kind of saying what I was sort of getting at, is that it is exactly that. Yeah. Do we have any questions from the room? Nobody else? Okay, cool. I don't see any in chat or in the Q&A, and I've asked a few questions now, so I think that we can wrap it up there and say thank you so much again, Dr. Abbate, for your very interesting talk and a brief history lesson on women in computing. I think it was really interesting and eye-opening, especially coming from a group of biologists who kind of have focused on either basic science or clinical research when it comes to the history of gender disparity there. So yeah, I'll go into kind of our closing remarks and end a little bit early for this retreat. I want to thank everyone who attended both in person and through Zoom. I want to thank our keynote speakers, Dr. Abbate and Dr. Banu Subramaniam, so much for attending and agreeing to give these wonderful talks, as well as our three trainee speakers, Nicole Sivitz, Marie Dussault, and Kat Denny. Today we heard from Kat about mental health issues facing gender minorities in STEM, and we learned and hopefully took home that we need to be thinking about these mental health issues not only just for women, but also for non-binary individuals and anything of that sort. And we heard from Dr. Banu all about the intersection of culture and science and gender and race, and how the intersection of culture and science actually affects both culture and science. I think that was really interesting. We heard from Nicole all about how vernacular and nomenclature in your research papers and your writing can have an active and important effect or profound effect on your research path and career. And I think that was really eye-opening. It was really interesting to hear from Marie, kind of a recap of how our internal WISE organization is both structured and how we handled the COVID epidemic. And finally, of course, we heard from Dr. Abbate about how gender shapes opportunities in STEM, but also a brief history lesson on the gender disparity issues in computing. As I said before, primarily in these talks, we've heard a lot about in biology, so it's interesting to hear from the other side. And so with that, I'd like to say, again, thank you all so much to all the attendees. And again, thank you to the keynotes. And this will conclude our 4th annual in-house education retreat. I hope to see you guys next year for maybe a bigger, maybe hybrid virtual, maybe all in-person event, something like that. But we'll certainly continue doing the in-house education retreat every year, as it's a staple of the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory Women in Science and Engineering program. And that'll wrap up this year's retreat. And thank you so much.